Can my son please spend the night at your place? Just for tonight, please keep him safe.
Can my son sleep here tonight? The plus-size black mom asked. The Korean Mafia boss froze. Her tiny, dirt-streaked hand gripped his polished car door, and with a whisper that made 3 armed guards forget how to breathe, she asked him for the one thing his empire could never buy back: a bed for the night. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because this story only gets more twisted from here. If you believe every mother deserves a second chance and every child deserves a warm bed, smash that like button right now. Drop a comment and tell me, would you have opened that gate? The rain over the city that night was not ordinary rain. It was the kind that seemed personal, the kind that felt like it had a grudge against anyone without a roof. Yolanda Freeman had learned, over 34 years of living, that the universe rarely announces its worst days in advance. It just quietly changes the locks while you are at work. That afternoon, she had come home from a double shift at the diner to find her belongings stacked outside her apartment door like a going-away party nobody attended. The landlord, a man with the warmth of a parking meter, informed her through a chained door that rent was 2 weeks late and patience, apparently, was not covered under her lease. Malik, her 9-year-old son, had watched the whole exchange with the calm of a boy who had already learned that adults do not always keep their promises, even the ones written in ink. Yolanda called her sister. No answer. She called her cousin. The number was disconnected, which felt less like coincidence and more like the family group chat quietly voting her off the island. By the time she and Malik had walked 6 blocks with one broken umbrella between them, she had stopped counting how many doors could close on a person in a single day. Then she saw the gate. It rose out of the storm like something summoned rather than built, iron bars twisting into shapes too elegant for a neighborhood that otherwise smelled like wet concrete and bad decisions. Behind it sat a mansion glowing gold against the dark, the kind of house that did not simply have a security system, it had a security philosophy. Yolanda did not know whose house it was. She only knew Malik's sneakers were soaked through and his teeth had started to chatter, and pride, she had decided long ago, was a luxury poor mothers could not always afford. She knocked. Then she pressed the intercom, which crackled to life with a guard's voice so flat it could have doubled as an insurance disclaimer. State your business. My son needs somewhere dry to sleep tonight, Yolanda said, steady despite the chill running through her. That's all I'm asking. One night. Inside the mansion, the request landed on a screen in a security room where 2 guards nearly choked on their coffee. Nobody asked this house for shelter. People asked this house for mercy, for extensions on debts for their lives, occasionally in that exact order. A mother asking for a bed for her child was so far outside the script that for a moment, nobody moved. Then the boss saw it. Kang Do-hyun rarely watched the gate cameras himself. He had people for that, the same way he had people for tariffs, people for enemies, and people for pretending he still had feelings. But something about the woman's posture on that grainy screen, spine straight despite the storm, one hand wrapped protectively around her son's shoulder, cut through 20 years of practiced indifference like a blade through silk. He set down his glass. Open it, he said. His right-hand man, a nervous accountant named Ji-sung, nearly dropped an entire folder of shipment records. Sir, with respect, this is not protocol. We do not open that gate for strangers. It has been rule number 1 since before either of us worked here. Rule number 2, Do-hyun said, already walking toward the door, is that I make the rules. The guards parted for him the way rivers part for men who have never once been told no and meant it. When the gate groaned open, Yolanda straightened, refusing to let exhaustion or intimidation show on her face. A woman who had survived eviction, a cheating ex-husband, and one unreasonably aggressive homeowners association meeting did not flinch just because the man walking toward her looked like he could end a war with a single phone call. Do-hyun stopped a few feet away, rain darkening his tailored shoulders, and looked past her to the boy clinging to her hand. Malik blinked up at him, exhausted but unafraid, the way children are when they have not yet learned who is supposed to be scary. Something in that small, tired face hit Do-hyun like a memory he had spent 2 decades trying to bury under money, power, and better lighting. He said nothing about it. Men like him did not explain their ghosts out loud. "Come inside," he said instead. Before the storm files a formal complaint. Neither of them knew yet that she had not stumbled onto that gate by accident. Fate, it turned out, had been planning this reunion for a very long time. Yolanda had expected many things once she stepped through that gate. A polite guest room, maybe. A suspicious housekeeper, definitely. What she had not expected was a foyer with a ceiling so high it seemed to have its own weather system, or a staircase that curved like it was auditioning for a movie about people richer than her entire zip code combined. Malik, however, was unbothered by luxury. 9-year-olds have a gift for treating chandeliers and vending machines with the same casual curiosity. He tugged Yolanda's sleeve and whispered, "Mama, is this a hotel or a museum?" "Baby, I don't know," she whispered back. "Just don't touch anything that looks older than Grandma." Du Hyun led them down a hallway lined with portraits of stern-looking ancestors who all appeared to share his exact talent for making eye contact feel like a threat. He gestured for a member of staff, a woman named Miss Ha, to bring towels, dry clothes, and food, in that order, like he was issuing military commands instead of basic hospitality. "You do not have to explain yourself," Du Hyun said, when Yolanda opened her mouth to do exactly that. "Not tonight." "I wasn't going to," she lied. "I was going to ask if you always let strangers into your fortress, or if my son, and I just got lucky." A ghost of a smile crossed his face, gone before it could be confirmed by witnesses. "You did not get lucky. You got approved. There is a difference." They ended up in a library that smelled like leather, old paper, and quiet decisions made over strong liquor. Malik, freshly dried and wrapped in a hoodie roughly 4 sizes too big, curled up on a couch that likely cost more than Yolanda's entire car, and was asleep within minutes, the specific deep sleep of a child who has finally stopped bracing for the next bad thing. Yolanda stayed upright, watching Du Hyun stare into the fireplace like it owed him money and had been dodging payment for years. She recognized that look. She had worn it herself most nights, back when she used to lie awake calculating exactly how far $43 could stretch. "You've got sad eyes for a man who owns a house with its own weather system," she said. Du Hyun glanced at her, surprised. Most people in his world did not speak to him like that. Most people in his world were too busy calculating how fast they could leave the room. "You've got sharp eyes for a woman who just walked 6 blocks in a storm to knock on a stranger's gate," he said. "Fair trade," she said, settling deeper into the chair. "I don't do polite small talk when my son is sleeping 10 feet away in a house I don't understand yet." He almost respected that, almost admired it. In his world, people either groveled or lied. Yolanda Freeman did neither. She simply existed, tired and unimpressed, like his entire mansion was a slightly overpriced motel she had reluctantly agreed to stay in. Somewhere beyond the library windows, headlights swept briefly across the driveway and vanished, easy to miss unless you had spent 20 years trained to notice exactly that kind of thing. Du Hyun noticed. His jaw tightened, just slightly, the way men do when the past and the present decide to show up uninvited on the same night. "Get some rest," he said, standing. "Both of you. Tomorrow, we will figure out the rest." "There's a rest to figure out?" Yolanda asked. "I thought this was a one-night thing." Du Hyun paused at the door, looking back at her with an expression she could not quite name. Somewhere between guilt and recognition, like a man realizing a debt he thought he had buried had just walked through his front gate wearing someone else's coat. "Nothing about tonight," he said quietly, "is a coincidence." Then he left her alone with those words, the fire, and a son sleeping peacefully in a house built on secrets older than either of them realized. Outside, the storm had not finished. It was only catching its breath. Morning arrived with the kind of golden light that made Yolanda suspicious. Nothing this pretty, she had learned, ever came without a catch. Sunlight through silk curtains, a breakfast table longer than her old apartment, fresh fruit arranged like it had been auditioning for a magazine cover. Malik was already up, sitting across from a very confused chef who had clearly never been asked whether pancakes could come with hot sauce on the side. "It's a delicacy where I'm from," Malik explained solemnly, as if defending a national treasure. Yolanda sipped coffee that tasted like it had been personally blessed by a barista in Seoul and tried to ignore the fact that Do Hyun was watching her from the doorway with the focused intensity of a man solving a puzzle he had been avoiding for 20 years. "You're staring," she said, without turning around. "I'm observing." "That's just staring with better manners." He almost smiled again. Twice in 12 hours. At this rate, his security team was going to start a betting pool. Their fragile peace lasted exactly until Ji-sung burst into the dining room, tie crooked, composure gone, looking like a man who had aged 5 years walking down one hallway.
"Sir."
"We have a problem. The Song family knows." The temperature in the room dropped without anyone touching the thermostat. "Knows what?" Do Hyun asked, voice flat in the specific way that made grown men reconsider their life choices. "That a woman and a child stayed here last night. Uninvited. They're already spinning it. Hostage."
"Spy."
"Weakness." Ji-sung swallowed hard. "You know how the Songs are. They do not need truth. They only need a rumor with a pulse." Yolanda set down her coffee cup very carefully, the way people do when they are trying not to shatter something, including their own composure. "I'm sorry. Did you just say hostage?" "I walked into a fortress asking for a bedtime, not a business deal." "Welcome to my world," Do Hyun said grimly, "where kindness gets misread as strategy and strategy gets answered with bullets." And that, dear viewer, is the real villain of this story. Not just the Song family circling like sharks who smell fear instead of blood, but an entire world that punishes ordinary kindness by assuming it must be a trick. A world where a tired mother cannot ask for shelter without someone somewhere deciding it must mean war. If you think kindness should never be treated like a weakness, hit that like button right now. Subscribe if you believe good people deserve safety, not suspicion. Only the cold, the paranoid, and the professionally petty would scroll past without showing some love.
Drop a comment.
Do you think the Songs are about to make the biggest mistake of their criminal careers? By nightfall, the mansion had transformed. Guards multiplied like they were being printed. Weapons that had been politely hidden the night before were now very much visible, tucked into jackets with the subtlety of a marching band. Do Hyun moved through it all with practiced calm, issuing orders in clipped Korean, occasionally switching to English just to update Yolanda, who had planted herself firmly in the library with Malik, arms crossed, refusing to be shuffled off into some guest wing like a piece of furniture nobody wanted to discuss. "You should hide," Do Hyun told her. "Somewhere deeper in the house." "I've been hiding my whole life," Yolanda said. "Hiding from bills, hiding from bad men, hiding from landlords who think eviction notices are a personality trait. I'm done hiding. If trouble is coming, I'd rather see it walk in the front door." Do Hyun studied her for a long moment, something unreadable passing behind his eyes. "You are either the bravest woman I have ever met or the most reckless." "In my neighborhood," Yolanda said, pulling Malik a little closer. "Those are usually the same thing." Outside, headlights turned onto the long driveway. "Not one set. 3. Ji-sung's voice crackled through the radio, tight with barely contained panic.
"Sir."
"They're here." Do Hyun exhaled slowly, the calm of a man who had done this before and hated every single time. He looked at Yolanda, at Malik curled protectively against her side, and made a decision that would echo far louder than any gunfire about to erupt outside his walls. "Stay behind me," he said. "Both of you." The storm outside had cleared hours ago. The one arriving now was entirely man-made. The first gunshot cracked against the mansion's outer wall like the sky itself had lost patience with everyone inside it. Malik flinched hard, burying his face against Yolanda's side, and for the first time since walking through that iron gate, real fear flickered across her expression. Not for herself. Mothers rarely have time to be afraid for themselves. It was the specific, ancient terror of a woman realizing her child was standing in the blast radius of somebody else's war. "Get down," Do Hyun said, already moving, positioning himself between them and the windows with the practiced ease of a man who had done this dance more times than any human being should have to. "Stay low. Do not move toward the doors." "You say that like I'm auditioning for a role I didn't apply for," Yolanda snapped, pulling Malik behind an overturned reading chair with the efficiency of a woman who had once diffused 3 toddler tantrums simultaneously at a birthday party gone wrong. Outside, chaos had fully arrived. 3 black SUVs sat at odd angles across the driveway, doors flung open, men pouring out with the kind of confidence that usually precedes either victory or a very embarrassing tactical mistake. The Song family had not come to negotiate. They had come to make a statement, and statements, in this world, were usually written in bullet holes. Guards moved through the estate like a rehearsed symphony, if symphonies occasionally required body armor. Gunfire echoed off marble and glass. Somewhere near the east wing, something shattered, expensive and irreplaceable, though nobody had time to mourn the vase. Du Hyun stepped toward the chaos, jaw set, eyes cold in a way that made it very clear why grown men who ran entire criminal networks still flinched at the sound of his footsteps. He was not just protecting territory tonight. He was protecting something he had not let himself want in 20 years, a chance to undo a debt he had spent 2 decades pretending did not exist. "You do not touch the woman," he told his men, voice carrying over the noise like a verdict. "You do not touch the boy. Anyone who lets either of them get hurt tonight will answer to me personally, and I promise you, that conversation will be far worse than anything the Songs are capable of." The fighting lasted 11 minutes. It felt like 11 years. When it ended, 3 Song vehicles reversed out of the driveway in a hurry that bordered on comedic, tires screeching, one car actually clipping a decorative hedge sculpture that had survived 2 previous attacks, and a very confused peacock. Du Hyun's men fanned out to secure the perimeter, adrenaline still humming through the estate like static electricity. Yolanda emerged from behind the chair, shaking, Malik gripping her hand so tightly her fingers had gone numb. She looked at Du Hyun, standing in the wreckage of his own foyer, blood on his knuckles that was not his own, and something inside her chest cracked open in a way she was not prepared for. "You almost got my son killed," she said, voice trembling, somewhere between fury and disbelief. "I almost got you both saved," Du Hyun said quietly. "There is a difference, even if it does not feel like one right now." She wanted to argue. She wanted to grab Malik and run straight back out into a world that, at minimum, had the decency to threaten her with something as boring as eviction instead of automatic weapons. But her legs would not move, and her son was still shaking against her side, and some small, stubborn part of her recognized that the man standing in front of her, blood on his hands, fury barely leashed, had just chosen their safety over his own. "Why?" she finally asked. "Why would you go to war for 2 strangers you met 12 hours ago?" Du Hyun opened his mouth to answer. Before a single word could leave him, the front door opened again, calmer this time, no gunfire, no shouting, just the soft, deliberate footsteps of someone who had clearly seen worse nights than this one and was not impressed. An older woman stepped into the wreckage of the foyer, silver hair pulled back, eyes sharp enough to cut glass, wearing an expression that suggested she had personally buried men for lesser offenses than a ruined vase. She took one look at Yolanda, and every ounce of color drained from her face. She did not look at Du Hyun. She did not ask about the attack, the damage, or the bodies presumably being quietly relocated somewhere off camera. She looked only at Yolanda and whispered a single word, heavy with 20 years of buried history. "Grace." Yolanda felt her own name catch in her throat before she could ask the obvious question, because the older woman had not said her name. She had said her mother's. "You knew my mother," Yolanda said slowly, each word deliberate, like she was walking across ice she did not trust.
How?
Madame Kong did not answer immediately. She crossed the wrecked foyer with the unhurried authority of a woman who had outlived storms far worse than a Song family ambush, stepping over a shattered vase, without so much as glancing down at it. She stopped in front of Yolanda and studied her face the way a jeweler studies a stone, searching for flaws, searching for proof. "Grace Freeman," Madame Kong said finally, quietly, like the name itself was something fragile she had kept wrapped in cloth for 2 decades. "You have her eyes, her stubborn mouth, even the way you are standing right now, refusing to back down even though you are terrified. That is entirely her." Yolanda's stomach turned. My mother passed away when I was 19. She never once mentioned Korea. Never mentioned any of this. She gestured vaguely at the mansion, the bloodied knuckles, the entire absurd theater of wealth and violence she had wandered into less than a day ago. So, either you have the wrong woman, or my mother kept a secret bigger than this house. She kept a promise, Madame Kong said. Which is different from a secret, though I understand why it might feel the same from where you are standing. Du Hyun stepped forward, something unreadable tightening across his face.
Mother.
What promise? Madame Kong finally looked at her son, and for the first time since Yolanda had arrived, the older woman's composure cracked slightly, just enough to reveal the exhaustion underneath. The one you were supposed to keep. The one I told you about when you were 17 years old and far too busy being angry at the world to listen properly. I remember every conversation we have ever had, Du Hyun said, voice low. I do not remember this one. That, Madame Kong said, is because you spent that entire year pretending you did not have a mother, let alone one giving you instructions. She sighed, the particular sigh of a woman who had spent decades cleaning up messes made by men who thought silence counted as strength. Sit down. All of you. This story does not belong in a hallway with broken glass on the floor. They moved to the library, the same room where Malik had slept soundly just hours earlier, blissfully unaware that his exhausted 9-year-old bones were resting inside the opening chapter of a decades-old debt. Miss He appeared with tea nobody touched, and a plate of small pastries that Malik eyed with the deep suspicion of a child who had already decided rich people's snacks were probably too fancy to taste good. Madame Kong settled into a chair across from Yolanda, folding her hands with the precision of someone about to deliver a verdict rather than a memory. 23 years ago, she began. Before any of you were born or before some of you had teeth, your mother worked for me. Not as a servant, not as staff, but as a friend. We met in New York, at a function neither of us wanted to attend, both of us hiding by the same exit door, both of us equally unimpressed by the men trying to talk to us. We stayed friends for years, through her marriage, through the birth of her first child, through more of my husband's business troubles than I care to remember. My mother never mentioned any of this, Yolanda said again, quieter this time, less accusation now and more disbelief. Because I asked her not to, Madame Kong said simply. My husband's world was not safe for outsiders to be associated with, even in memory. I protected her by making sure her connection to this family disappeared from the record entirely. It was the only gift I could give her that would not put her in danger. Du Hyun's jaw tightened. Get to the promise, mother. Madame Kang's eyes flicked to her son, sharp enough to remind him, even now, even in his own mansion, surrounded by his own guards, exactly whose son he still was. Your father was dying. You were 17, angry, and about to inherit an empire you were nowhere near ready to run. Grace came to visit me during that time, one last visit before she moved away for good, and she made me promise something. She said if her family ever needed help, truly needed it, desperate enough to knock on a stranger's door in the middle of a storm, that our family would answer. Not because of debt, not because of business, because of loyalty between two women who understood what it meant to survive men who thought they owned the world. Yolanda felt tears she had been holding back for over 24 hours finally threatened to spill. She never told me any of this. She protected you the same way I protected her, Madame Kong said gently. Some promises are heavier when spoken aloud. Du Hyun stood abruptly, pacing toward the fireplace, his reflection ghost-like in the darkened window beyond it. You told me about this promise when I was 17. I do not remember agreeing to anything. You did not have to agree, Madame Kong said. You only had to remember. And you did not. Which is why, when a woman named Freeman appeared on our security cameras last night, soaked to the bone with a child at her side, some part of you froze before you even knew why. The room went silent except for the crackle of the fire, and Yolanda watched something shift across Du Hyun's face, recognition dawning slow and heavy, like a stone finally settling at the bottom of a lake it had been dropped into decades ago. That is why I opened the gate, he said quietly, almost to himself. Not because of pity. Because some part of me already knew. Yes, Madame Kong said. Your instincts remembered what your mind had buried. Malik, who had been sitting quietly through most of this, clearly more interested in the pastries than the family history unfolding around him, finally spoke up. So wait, are we like cousins now? Or family friends? Because if we're cousins, I get to ask for a bigger allowance. The tension in the room cracked slightly, Du Hyun letting out something that was almost a laugh, surprising even himself. Not cousins, he said, but something owed. Something my family has failed to deliver for over 2 decades. I don't need charity, Yolanda said quickly, old pride flaring even through her exhaustion. I didn't come here for a payout on some ancient promise. I came here because my son needed somewhere dry to sleep. This is not charity, Madame Kong said firmly. This is a debt finally being honored, 20 years late. There is a difference, and I intend for my son to understand it fully before this night is over. Du Hyun looked at Yolanda, something steady and resolved settling into his expression, the haunted uncertainty of the previous night replaced by something closer to purpose. Then let me be clear, he said. You are not a guest in this house anymore. You are under this family's protection. Whatever the Song family started tonight, whatever comes next, you and your son will not face it alone. Outside, the last of the emergency vehicles finally cleared the driveway, leaving the estate in an unfamiliar, fragile quiet. Yolanda looked down at Malik, half asleep against her arm despite the chaos of the evening, and then back up at Du Hyun, a man she had known for less than a day, and yet who now stood tied to her family by a promise older than her own memory. All right, she said finally, voice steady despite everything. But I have questions. A lot of them. And you're going to answer every single one. Du Hyun almost smiled again. 3 times now. His men really were going to start that betting pool. Fair enough, he said. Where would you like to start? Morning came softer the second time around, though nothing about the previous 24 hours had exactly qualified as gentle. Yolanda woke in a guest room the size of her old apartment's entire footprint, momentarily forgetting where she was until she spotted Malik sprawled diagonally across a bed clearly designed for someone with better manners about personal space. She found Du Hyun downstairs already, sleeves rolled up, reviewing security reports with Ji Sung, who looked like a man who had aged an entire decade overnight and was not thrilled about the accelerated timeline. Any casualties on our side? Yolanda asked, sliding into a chair across from him, surprising herself with how naturally the question came out, as if she had been asking about Mafia body counts her entire life instead of, at most, 24 hours. 2 guards injured. Nothing fatal, Du Hyun said. The Songs lost more than they gained. They came expecting an easy target. They found an entire family debt standing in their way instead. Lucky them, Yolanda said dryly. Nothing ruins a good ambush like unexpected inherited loyalty. Ji Sung, still visibly rattled, cleared his throat. Sir, if I may, the Song family will not simply retreat and accept defeat. This was a probe, not a full assault. They wanted to see how hard you would fight to protect outsiders. Now that they know the answer, they will come back with something bigger. Du Hyun's expression darkened, though not with fear. Men like him did not startle easily. He simply recalculated, the way a chess player reworks an entire board after losing one piece they had not expected to matter. Then we make sure the next move is ours, he said. Yolanda leaned back, arms crossed. See, this is exactly the kind of sentence that makes me nervous. In my world, when someone says we make the next move, it usually means somebody's car insurance is about to skyrocket. In your world, I'm guessing it means something involves more bullets. Occasionally, Du Hyun admitted. But not today. Today, it means paperwork. Yolanda blinked. Paperwork. You're telling me the terrifying Korean mafia boss is about to fight his enemies with a stapler. Paperwork, Du Hyun repeated, almost amused, in my world, is far more dangerous than bullets. Bullets end one problem. The right documents end an entire family's ability to operate. He explained, patiently, the way a man explains something he has clearly wanted to say out loud for a long time, but never had the right audience for. The Song family's power was not built on loyalty or respect, but on a fragile network of shell companies, bribed officials, and old debts nobody had bothered auditing in years. Madame Kong, it turned out, had spent decades quietly documenting every single one of those weaknesses, waiting for the right moment to use them. She's basically been sitting on a loaded weapon disguised as a filing cabinet, Yolanda said, impressed despite herself. My mother, Du Hyun said, believes patience is a far sharper blade than any knife. Your mother, Yolanda said, sounds like she should be running this entire operation and you should be doing paperwork. Du Hyun actually laughed at that, a short surprised sound, like he had forgotten his own body was capable of producing it. You are not wrong. She has said the same thing herself. Several times. Loudly. Later that afternoon, Madame Kong summoned Yolanda to the garden, a space so meticulously maintained it looked less like landscaping and more like quiet warfare against chaos itself. She handed Yolanda a worn photograph, the same one from the night before, two young women laughing over drinks, one of them unmistakably Grace Freeman, younger, brighter, entirely unburdened by the weight her daughter now carried. She looked happy, Yolanda said softly, tracing the edge of the photo. She was, Madame Kong said, for a while, before life happened to her the way it happens to most of us. Quietly, then all at once. Why didn't she ever tell me any of this? About you, about this family, about any of it? Madame Kong considered the question carefully, the way a woman considers something she has turned over in her own mind 1,000 times without ever fully settling on an answer. Because love, real love, sometimes means burying the parts of your life that could put the people you love in danger. Your mother chose silence to protect you. I imagine, somewhere, she is furious that silence eventually led you straight to our gate anyway. Yolanda laughed despite the ache in her chest, sharp and unexpected.
Yeah.
That does sound like her. Cosmic irony with a side of maternal guilt. Their conversation was interrupted by Malik barreling into the garden, breathless, cheeks flushed with the particular excitement only 9-year-olds achieve over things adults have long stopped finding thrilling. Mama, they let me hold a sword.
A real one.
Well, not hold it, but I stood really close to it. Absolutely not, Yolanda said immediately, shooting a look toward the nearest guard, who suddenly found something fascinating to examine on the ground. It's ceremonial, Madame Kong said, hiding a smile. Purely decorative. Mostly, Yolanda repeated flatly. That word is doing an enormous amount of work in that sentence. That evening, after Malik had finally been coaxed away from weaponry-adjacent activities and into bed, Yolanda found herself back in the library, the fire crackling low, Du Hyun standing near the window with a drink he had not actually touched. You've been avoiding my questions all day, she said, settling into the chair across from him. I believe you promised to answer every single one. I did, he admitted. Ask. Why did you really freeze that first night when you saw Malik's face on the camera? Your mother said instinct. I want the real answer. Du Hyun was quiet for a long moment, the kind of silence that carries more weight than most sentences ever could. I had a brother, he finally said. Younger. He died when I was 19, caught in violence that had nothing to do with him and everything to do with the world I was born into. He was Malik's age. When I saw your son's face on that screen, tired, unafraid, trusting, it felt like looking directly at a memory I have spent 20 years trying not to look at. Yolanda's chest tightened, the sarcasm she usually wielded like armor momentarily disarmed by the raw honesty in front of her. I'm sorry. Do not be, he said. For the first time in a long time, that memory did not feel like only pain. It felt like a second chance to protect something I once failed to protect. The silence that followed was different from every silence before it, softer, less guarded, something quietly shifting between them that neither one seemed entirely ready to name out loud. For a mafia boss, Yolanda finally said, breaking the moment before it could get too heavy for either of them to carry, you're annoyingly good at emotional honesty. Somebody should really warn people before they walk into your library. Du Hyun almost smiled again.
For times now.
Ji-sung, somewhere in the house, was probably updating a spreadsheet. "Get some rest," he said. "Tomorrow, we finish what the song started. Properly this time." Yolanda stood, pausing at the door, looking back at him with something unreadable in her expression, equal parts exhaustion, gratitude, and the very beginning of something she was not quite ready to admit to herself yet. "Tomorrow," she agreed. "But just so you know, if paperwork turns into gunfire again, I'm renegotiating my rent-free arrangement." "Noted," Do-hyun said, and for the first time since she had knocked on that gate, the words sounded less like a warning and more like a promise. The next morning arrived with the particular tension of a house preparing for war disguised as a business meeting. Madame Kong had assembled her decades of quiet documentation into something resembling a legal guillotine, folders stacked with the kind of precision that suggested she had been waiting years for an excuse to use them. "The Song family's empire," she explained, spreading documents across the dining table like a general briefing troops, "rests on 3 pillars. Bribed customs officials at the port, a shell company laundering money through fake construction permits, and a very foolish nephew who has been skimming from his own family for the better part of 2 years." Yolanda whistled low. "You've been sitting on this for how long?" 11 years, Madame Kong said, entirely unbothered. "Patience, as I said, is a sharper blade than any knife." Do-hyun stood at the head of the table, reviewing the final assembled case with the focused calm of a man who preferred precision over chaos whenever possible, though the previous night's gunfire had proven he was equally comfortable with both. By this afternoon, every official the Songs have bribed will receive an anonymous package proving exactly how compromised they are. By tomorrow, their shell company collapses. And their nephew, he added, almost bored, will discover that family loyalty runs out considerably faster than personal greed. "So basically," Yolanda said, "you're not attacking them with soldiers. You're attacking them with an audit." "An audit," Do-hyun agreed, "is far more permanent than a bullet." By early evening, word came through Ji-sung, who arrived considerably calmer than he had the previous day, practically glowing with the specific relief of a man whose job had briefly stopped resembling a hostage situation. It worked. 2 of their port contacts have already resigned. Their construction permits are being investigated by 3 separate agencies. And the nephew, he added, unable to hide his satisfaction, has reportedly already fled to a cousin's apartment, insisting he knew nothing about anything, which is somehow both a confession and a lie in the same sentence. The Song family, once feared, once poised to swallow Do-hyun's territory whole, had been dismantled without a single additional shot fired. Not through violence, but through the quiet, devastating precision of a promise finally being honored, 20 years late but sharper for the wait. That night, the mansion felt different. Lighter. The kind of quiet that comes after a storm has genuinely passed, rather than merely paused to catch its breath. Malik had commandeered an entire wing of the library for what he generously called a fort, built from every couch cushion the staff would allow him to relocate, and was currently attempting to convince one very patient guard that ceremonial swords made excellent flashlights if you squinted. Yolanda found Do-hyun on the back terrace, looking out over gardens finally still after 2 days of chaos. The same haunted look from that first night now softened into something closer to peace. "So," she said, settling beside him, arms crossed against the evening chill. "Enemies defeated. Family dead honored. Ceremonial swords confiscated, mostly. What happens now?" "Now," Do-hyun said, "you have options. My mother has already offered to help you and Malik settle somewhere new, somewhere safe, fully funded, no strings attached. It is the very least this family owes you. And if I don't want charity," Yolanda said, echoing her earlier stubbornness, though with noticeably less spite this time. "Then," Do-hyun said, turning to face her fully, "you could stay. Not out of obligation. Not out of debt. But because for the first time in longer than I am willing to admit, this house does not feel haunted when you and your son are in it." Yolanda studied him for a long moment, searching for the catch, the trick, the fine print every good deal seemed to hide somewhere. She found none, only a tired, powerful man who had spent 2 decades burying grief under duty, finally looking at her like she was not a debt to be settled, but a possibility he had not let himself consider in years. "You do realize," she said slowly, "that I come with an opinionated 9-year-old, a deep distrust of fancy pastries, and absolutely zero patience for men who think silence counts as communication." "I am aware," Du Hyun said. "I am hoping to improve in at least one of those categories." "Just one." "I did not say which one." Despite herself, Yolanda laughed, real and warm, the first sound of genuine ease she had allowed herself since walking 6 blocks in the rain with $43 and a prayer. "You're lucky or charming for a man who apparently solves problems with audits instead of conversation." "You are lucky," Du Hyun countered, "that you knocked on the one gate in this city guaranteed to answer." Inside, Madame Kong watched the two of them through the terrace doors, a small, satisfied smile settling onto her face as she finally set the old photograph of Grace down on the mantel, no longer a wound kept hidden in a drawer, but a promise finally, fully repaid. Weeks later, Yolanda stood in a kitchen that was, remarkably, her own, funded not by charity, but by a job Madame Kong had insisted on creating specifically because Yolanda's negotiation skills were, in her words, criminally underused. Malik had a school uniform hanging by the door and an alarming number of opinions about which guard made the best training partner for something he insisted on calling ninja practice. Du Hyun visited more than business strictly required, always with some flimsy excuse about security checks or paperwork that mysteriously took several hours and always ended in dinner. Nobody in the house was fooled, least of all Ji-sung, who had, in fact, started that betting pool weeks ago and was reportedly making a small fortune off it. Yolanda had walked into that storm with nothing but a broken umbrella, a sleepy son, and a single desperate question. She had not found charity that night. She had found a debt her mother had planted decades before she was born, finally blooming into something none of them had expected. A home. A family stitched together from grief, loyalty, and one very stubborn, very tired mother who refused to let a locked door decide her son's future. If there is one thing this story proves, it is that sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is simply knock, ask for shelter, and trust that somewhere behind even the most terrifying gates, there is still room for kindness to answer back. And if that message resonated with you even a little, make sure you are subscribed, because stories like this one are only just getting started, and you will not want to miss what comes next.